and we are delighted to introduce to you all Team 5199, Robot Dolphins of Outer Space from California, all the way from California. They have 9 seasons of experience in FIRST, and they've been 3 times regional winners. So they are with us today, and they're here to talk to us about scouting and strategy. So Team 5199, welcome to warm up.
Hello, everyone. You can hear me, correct?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Alrighty, cool. So we'll go ahead and get started. So this is getting a leg up for scouting and strategy, just in case you're in the wrong place. And so introduction, I'm Teddy Bulakis. I'm a strategy, scouting, design, manufacturing alumni mentor of 5199. I'm a mechanical engineering major at San Jose State University, and I have 6 years of FRC experience. So the first thing to note for strategy and scouting is the game manual. It's essential to building a good strategy and scouting for the season. It's the first thing that everyone looks at, and everyone should have a good comprehension of it in how points are scored, fouls are scored, and the design parameters, because you don't want to be learning the rules of the game at your first event. So more into scouting now. So first, what is scouting? Scouting is the gathering of data on how a robot plays the game. Scouters gather data throughout an event by observations and asking questions to help better understand robots' capabilities and performance. This data is later used to help prepare for matches, alliance selection, and more. Scouting data is really important to FRC competitions because you want to know what every robot at the competition can do and how effectively they can play the game. Going through the competition without scouting is like not studying for the final exam in school. It may seem okay, but once you get there, you realize, oh, I probably should have prepared a little bit better, so I could have done a little bit better. So the first type of scouting is background scouting, also known as pre-scouting, and it's done usually before events, more prominently in the end of the season. And so background scouting is just gathering data on a robot that has already competed in matches during the competition season. It's more common during district champ and world championships because pre-scouting can also be done during regionals. It's really looking at the past presence of a robot and trying to get the essence of that robot going into an event, because robots can change event to event and can get better. But if you know roughly what the robot will look like, it can give you help in identifying good teams early on. So if we go any farther, we should talk about the 2 different types of data. There's qualitative and quantitative. Qualitative data is used for measuring the traits of something. So for qualitative data when you're scouting, it would be a scouter subjectively describing a robot's performance, like it drives fast, or it shoots balls really fast. Quantitative data is used for measuring the number of something. So it's the scouter objectively counting values during a match. So in Rapid React, the robot scored 3 in the upper, 2 in the lower, or the robot climbed to the mid rung. And this correlates to the different types of scouting during a competition. There's pit scouting, and then there's stand or match scouting. For pit scouting, it's asking questions to the team and their pits, looking to learn the robot's capabilities. You want to know what the robot can do, not necessarily what it does. So in this case, you'll get more qualitative type of data on the capabilities of a robot and what its upper limit is.
A forma mais real de conseguir dados.
For stand and match scouting, it's observing the matches played and the robot performances on the field.
Observar as partidas
It is
e o que o robô
going
está
to
fazendo é
be
essencial.
what the robot does on the field. And so
É
this
aqui que vamos
distinction
definir o que o
is
robô faz,
getting
se enquadra.
what the robot does on the field, and in turn
nós entendemos.
it hold on a second. Okay, So the scout matting is what it does on the field, and that's more the quantitative data, like how many points on average are they scoring per match. So to input all this data, you need scouting sheets. And for the scouting sheets, there's 4 main ways to record the data. The first is paper sheets, which is, the old-fashioned back and forth technology. One of the new popular ways for more moderate teams is Google Forms. For more high-end teams, it's customized apps. And, the fourth most common, sadly, is not doing any at all, which, is not the best chance for success if you're trying to improve your scouting. And so how we make our scouting sheets is first we look at the quantitative data on robots. So it's how much can this robot score? Where do they score? What is their autonomous? And it's really the bulk of our data, and it's really just defining, like, in numbers sense, what the robot did during that match. Did it score any balls? Did it climb? Did it move during autonomous? Next, we look at qualitative data and try and incorporate that. So then it's kind of more open-ended questions, like, was in comparison to other robots on the field, were they fast? Were they slow? What is the confidence level of the drivers? Does it look like it's the first time holding the controller, or does it look like they've been doing it for years? Did they play defense? If they play defense, did it slow down an opposing alliance, or did it not really do anything at all? And lastly, the key thing that we have is a lot of comment space. And so that is a chance for our scouters to really give their input on the match, because, not everyone can watch every robot every single match. That's where your scouters are for. And so a chance for them to really leave a response and say, like, oh, there's everything else is zeros, but that's because, the robot died immediately during autonomous. And so that's easier to go back and look through and say, oh, this robot, just did really poorly this one match. Now you have a chance to get an explanation why. This is an example of our pit scouting form for the 2022 Houston World Championship. As you can see, we have some pretty basic questions in terms of what their autonomous is, what their climbing capability is, and how experienced the drivers are. And for this, it's, again, more to get the sense of what the robot can do, because the stand scouting data is what the robot actually does during a match. And here is part of our 2022 Orange County Regional Stand Scouting form. For autonomous, we checked off their autonomous for their crossing the line. And then we had sections for how many shots they attempted, how many they scored, and during the end game, corresponding whether they attempted to climb and what bar they ended up climbing to, and roughly how long it took them. So the next thing to talk about for scouting is the pick list, the all-important pick list for alliance selection. The pick list is the order of the robots your team wants to play with during alliance selection. It's usually based off of different ranking criteria, because everyone has their own opinion of who does best at what. And so each team's pick list can look different. It's something that every team during every competition should make. It doesn't matter what you're ranked at, because it can come into play. We had a regional a couple of years ago in which we were 5th to last at a competition, and we were still picked as the 8th seed's first pick. And so we got selected, and we had to immediately go back and make another pick. And so even if you're not expecting it, you could still be picked early and still have a chance to give your input on the next selection at alliance selection. And when you're talking about pick list, it's really the culmination of how well you scouted at an event. That's why you see prominent teams always make them, because they've done their homework, they've done their scouting. So even if they're not performing as well in the field with their robot, they still have other aspects that can contribute to an alliance when it's formed. And a key tip that we've started doing is include yourself in your pick list as if you were just another team. And so we really like doing this now, because when we're at an event, we get to see, okay, this is where our data stacks up against other teams. And so when we're ranking ourselves and making a pick list, we'd say, okay, if we weren't ourselves, would we be the #1 overall pick? Would be 5th pick, the 10th pick, or not even on the pick list at all? So that leads us to how we make our pick list. First and foremost, is go over your scouting data. If you're doing all this scouting and hard work, but then not using it to make your pick list, you're not utilizing your scouting data well enough. The next thing is to rank all the top offensive robots based on your data, not just the standings. So if it's a larger event, this list can go on for 20 robots. If it's a small event, maybe there's only, 5 or 6 prominent scoring robots. Next, rank the top prospective defense robots. And so not every robot that can play defense does play defense. And so what you're really looking at is the teams that have played defense, and then those who you think could play good defense. So maybe, they're primarily an offensive scoring robot, but they haven't done as well. So if you pick them, you ask them to play defense. Do you think they'd be good at that? Or no, because they have a mechanum drive base that would just slide all over the place. The next list we make is if there's any do not pick teams. Typically, these are robots that are dead for a lot of matches or just break every single match they're out there, or there's some kind of deficiency in which they're not living up to their potential and their reliability isn't to a place where you trust them to go best of one and be reliable to help you win that match. Usually our do not pick list is about 10% of teams. So if in Houston there's 60 teams, it's about 6 teams. At a normal regional event, it's 30 to 40 teams. It's usually 3 to 4 teams that make it to the do not pick list. Next thing is we make a list of at least 20 teams deep. At Houston, it would be a little bit longer of a list, but you want to make a list of who you want to play with. This is where you start mixing in your top offensive robots, and then you start saying, okay, so at this roughly point, now we're switching defense and third members of our alliance and swapping over, because the last thing you do is review and add compatibility comments to your pick list selection. And what that means is in a game such as Rapid React, where a traversal climb can add a lot of value to your alliance. If your first alliance partner, maybe is an offensive powerhouse but can't climb, then you're looking for a complement that can climb for your third alliance partner that maybe, only plays defense, but it can give you that consistent climb to make up for where your other alliance partner is lacking. And so that's what I mean by adding compatibility comments, in that there are some robot pairings that work well together. Whereas if you have, an alliance with 3 offensive robots, none of you can climb, you're selling yourself short part of the game phase. So a couple of scouting tips that haven't been really discussed yet is, first, create a scouting system that produces accurate data you can trust. If you have a scouting system and you don't trust the data from it, there's no point in having it. And if you have a scouting system that gives you data that you trust, but it's not accurate, that also doesn't really do you any good. So always start off simpler and work your way up. But the goal of the scouting is to give you data that you trust, that is accurate to what's happening on the field. Next is to refine your scouting sheets throughout the season. If we go back and check out the scouting sheet from the champs for pit scouting, this is all there was. There's all of 8 questions on it, one of which was the team number. And that's because when we went through it, we realized, hey, we're gathering this data, but we're not necessarily using it. So that leads to the next point, and record the data on whatever helps you make decisions. If you only care about who's the most accurate shooter, then only record how many shots they make versus how many they miss. If you care about, climbing, make sure you have that in your scouting sheet. If you care about none of that, you just care about which robot looks the coolest, then, only have sections for how cool a robot looks on a scale of 1 to 10. Next is your pick list should account for compatibility, not just comparability, which I already touched on a little bit, but you want to make sure that it's not just who's the best robot for this that's still available. It's who would also complement the pre-existing members of our alliance. So if there's a shortcoming between the current alliance try and look to fill in that hole with your next selection. Lastly, the more matches a scouter watches, the better input they will have. If you have scouters that go the whole event watching all the matches, they're going to have good input for scouting meetings, pick list meetings, and strategy talks. And so they shouldn't be overlooked when it comes to those types of things, because they've been putting in the work, and it's a great way to reward your scouters for paying attention throughout the competition. You give them a say when their input is needed. So next we'll dive into a little bit of strategy. So first, what is strategy? Strategy is your team and alliance's plan of action when competing. Teams should shape their strategies based on the experience and scouting data. And so your strategy can change throughout the course of an event throughout a season. Alliance strategy is an agreed upon compromise between all teams involved, and it is believed to yield the best chance of success in a match. If you're going into a match and you're against some great alliance that you're probably not going to win, your strategy could be, hey, let's get the other 2 ranking points, so that way we don't come away with nothing. Or if you think you have a chance at winning, okay, and that's your main goal, how do we go about winning this match? And so your match strategy can change match to match, and your team
Vamos
strategy can
pensar
change
qual a nossa
and how
estratégia,
you
como
do.
venceríamos a partida.
It's very good to make sure that you're able to execute multiple strategies throughout a given event.
É muito
If
bom
you're a
ter certeza.
one-trick pony, you're going to be less successful than a multiple-trick pony. And so the next part of that is the match strategy meetings. And so the alliance meetings are also when teams for an alliance for a qualification match, or if you're in elimination matches, come together and talk about what the plan is going forward into that match. And so when you go into the meeting, a pro tip is to always have a plan. Even if this is the first time you're talking to a team, you should already know what they can do, what your alliance partners can do, and what the other opposing alliance can do. And that's where your scouting data comes in. It's not just something that you wait until the end of the competition for the pick list to take into account. Throughout the event, you're taking data, and you should use that data throughout the event as well. And so when you go into a meeting and you have a plan, it's a lot easier to go in and say, this is what we were thinking about this match. What were you thinking? And to compare different plans together and combine the best parts of them. If you go in and no one has a plan and you're building it there, it's it can be a lot more complicated and things can be left out. So an important thing to note is that you want to recognize the potential competency of your alliance partners going into a match strategy game. If you're going in with 254, 1690, there's a good chance, no matter what team you are, you're probably not going to be the driver's seat of the alliance meeting. When you have elite teams like that, it's okay to take more of a back seat and kind of go along with it, not be the sole driver. Whereas if you're a longtime veteran experienced team and your
Você é
alliance
veterano com
is a
muitos
bunch of
anos de
other rookie
experiência.
teams, that's
Você
when you
aliança
need to
com
step
times
up a little bit
novos.
more and
Aqui
guide
você
the meeting
precisa
because they
ter
maybe have
certeza
less
de-
experience in the matter. So some better strategy tips is to trust and share your data. There's a phenomenon in FRC in which if you go to a team and ask them about their robot and how they're doing, they tend to err on the side of hyping themselves up. As you know, most people would. You got to hype yourself up so that way, you're happy, you're excited, but not all of the teams are the best robot in the competition. So if a robot says, oh, we can, do this autonomous 100% of the time, and your data shows that they've tried it every single time and failed 100% of the time, then you should go into the meeting saying, hey, we know that you've tried and failed, and ask clarifying questions. Say, we've seen your autonomous try and fail so many times. Is there something up with it? What's going on? That helps to elevate your alliance and not just taking everyone at face value, because everyone believes that they can do everything, but sometimes they need a little bit of help. And so if you go into the meeting having data that, oh, this robot broke the last match, then you can go in and say, hey, we saw you guys break the last match. Is there anything we can do to help? And that way everyone knows and is on the same page. Okay, this robot may not be competing at 100% capabilities going into this next match. Next is that clipboards, iPads, whiteboards are the way to go for match strategy meetings. Not everyone's a visual learner, but it's definitely easier to organize 3 teams of robots on a piece of paper, so that way everyone can visualize and see where they're going. In Rapid React, it was it was quite easy to see the regions of the field, so it was open and what everyone was trying to plan to do. It's really good to have that type of visual representation of what people are trying to do and where everyone's trying to go. So that way everyone can be on the same page a lot easier. When you disagree during meetings, because it's bound to happen at some point, usually we try to defer to higher seeds and established teams. And so what's unique about alliances is that it's 3 teams. And so that means that there's always going to be an odd number and there's going to be a majority and a minority. If 2 teams are really butting heads, which has happened before, and it's kind of like, I want to do it this way. No, I want to do it this way. Usually we try to defer to the higher seed and more established teams because they have more at stake and know what's going on. If there's a team on your alliance that's ranked number 1 and you and your other alliance partner are in the 30s, I would assume that the number 1 seed probably knows what they're doing, so their strategy has a higher chance of success for the shared goal of getting ranking points and winning. So I would tend to trust them more than a more mid-level team. And then lastly is have an open mindset. For both scouting and strategy, there's so many different ways to play games and to go about FRC that you shouldn't have a closed off mindset and only focus and streamline on one certain thing. You could always, see what other teams at the event are doing and say, oh, I really like that strategy. I hadn't thought of it. Let's try and, use that strategy in an upcoming match. Or you could have someone in the stands who notices something and say, oh, aren't we doing this instead of this? There's so many different ways to gain inspiration in engineering in general that if you're having a closed mindset in your scouting and strategy, that you're really closing yourself off to a world of possibilities that anyone can bring up a good point to the light. So now, I know it's a little bit shorter, but are there any questions from the chat from everyone watching?
Yep, if you're up to it, Teddy, let's wait for questions here in the Q&A section, and they are already coming in. So, an anonymous attendee, these are 3 questions for you. First of all, how is scout data collected and distributed in a timely manner during competition? Do you want me to tell you to give you all of them, or just?
We'll go one part at a time.
Yep. So how's scout data collected? Yeah.
So the way we do our scouting data is we use Google Forms. And so what happens is it's sent out, we use Slack for our team communication. So the link to the form is sent out in our scouting Slack channel. And from there, all the scouters on their phone click on the Google Form link and fill out the form. There's a slot for the match number, the team number. And so those are all then sent, to the response to the Google Form, so we can look at it later on a spreadsheet.
Okay. Well, the next question is, I'm going to combine the next 2 questions. How do you integrate scout data into matches? And then how do you accurately communicate to draft coaches during the events?
So the way we usually kind of tabulate the data is during the competition itself. If we're in the middle of the first day, we don't necessarily have time to go through and, do a lot of fancy stuff with it. So we'll sort it by team or and kind of look at brief summary on the Google's spreadsheet and kind of see what the robot's kind of been doing, check the comments, see if there's anything major of note. And then afterwards, we usually use Tableau to try and visualize it a little bit more and see kind of a graph of it. And we communicate this by having our drive coach and match strategy people go up to the stands and I didn't mention this previously, but one of the big keys is integrating strategy and scouting together.
Uma coisa que eu
Because
não
if you have a
mencionei
really good
antes,
scouting
e
team,
que é muito
but it's
importante,
never referred
é
to
mesclar
by the
estratégias
strategy
e
team,
scouting.
then it's not doing as much good. So we encourage students to go up and talk to the scouting people, say, hey, this team we're competing against, what give me what they're doing, like what's up with them.
Okay. Well, staying on the regional event, the scouting in the events. So does your team support the idea of having a quick paid scout in between matches, just after one match, to remodel the strategy for the next one via a very, very quick paid scouting?
Usually our pit scouting is done during the practice day of an event, or the first day if it's not quite finished yet. And so that's really done to check and see, going into it, what the robot, because assuming everyone's, coming into a competition with a working robot and nothing's broken yet. It's really to get the baseline of the team and then use the stand scouting data to kind of fill in blanks of what the robot's doing performance-wise. So we don't usually go back and repit scout teams.
Okay, and well, as you told us, there's a specific part of the team that focuses on scouting during the regional events. But especially for the Mexican teams that are watching us today that want to improve their scouting skills, the question would be, how many people do you think is enough for a good scouting team? And how do you prevent the burnout of the scouters during the matches?
So the answer to the first part is how many is a good number? As many as you can get. You definitely want at least 6 people watching a match at a time. So that way there's one person per robot. But what we usually do is we have 7, one for each person of the robot. And then we have our scouting lead kind of taking an overview of it and saying because it's kind of hard to tell, like robot on red 1 versus blue 2, how they're competing against each other when you're just watching the sole robot. When you have someone taking an overview look of it, it's a lot easier to pick like, oh, this robot's, doing really well. This robot, is kind of just driving in circles. And so in conjunction with that, of how do you prevent burnout, it's really keeping them engaged and not having the same 6 scouters for all, potentially 100 matches or so. And so we do this. One of the ways is try and make it more engaging with the comments of the descriptions for each of our scouting forms to, not just be super serious. And we also add an additional comment section aside from the, important ones of like, did a robot break or something like that. But, tell us something that is unique about the robot or they thought was cool or fun about the last match that they watched.
Okay, and also for the scouting team, Teddy, how do you train them to, well, give their best during the regional events? Do you have any way to train them before the regional events?
So we believe that the best way to train people in scouting is by doing. So before the event, usually our events are Thursday through Saturdays. And so roughly that Monday or so before an event, we'll go through the scouting sheet with all the prospective scouters, which is a large majority of our team. Our prospective scouters, pretty much anyone not in a pit, has the eligibility to scout for us. And so we go through the scouting sheet, see if there's any questions, if there's anything we needed to refine. And then during the practice day, what we do is we have people scout a couple of matches. So that way they can get into the flow of how to watch, what to watch for. So that way during the regional, when it starts, or the event, they're ready to go and they know what to do.
Okay. Yep. Well, I need to tell you that here in Mexico, most of the teams want to improve their scouting skills. I know it's most of the teams in the US have a pretty strong strategy on how to do scouting the best way. But well, the thing is that we want to learn and we're here to learn. So the next questions are a bit more technical. And first of all, Hugo Espino asks, what do you have any specific app you use to analyze your scouting data? And also Stephen Desjardins asks, when do you make the pick list and how long does it take you?
So to analyze our data, we will usually, we're not big tech people, so that's why we use Google Forms instead of our own distinct app. So likewise, we try to use Tableau, but it doesn't always materialize for us during a regional event. So if we have the time or the capabilities and someone wants to do it, we'll Tableau and graph some of the scoring outputs of alliances and like their average, how many points they score and climbing statistics. Otherwise, we usually just kind of use the functions in Google Sheets to graph it and kind of get the idea of it. And then when we go through and talk about teams, it's their responses from that and their averages over the competition that we really look at. And for the pick list, we usually do that if our if day one of the event is Friday and then day two of the event is Saturday with eliminations. Friday night after the first full day of competition, we usually make our pick list then. And so that way we know, what teams we're looking at, which teams are kind of like on the brink, and we need to watch and ask follow-up questions to. So that way, during that first half of qualifications before alliance selection around lunch, we can kind of answer those questions we still have about certain teams. So that way, when it goes into alliance selection, we're not, frantically writing down team numbers or like, oh, maybe we forgot a team. We have that extra time to prepare and know what we're doing.
Awesome. The next question, Teddy, is what role does the scouting team play when selecting events prior to season? And how much time do you spend doing scouting to select the regional events you will attend in the season?
So usually our scouting doesn't affect the events we go to decide which events we go to normally. Normally we go to events that are nearby, first of all, and then we try and space them out. But the scouting only really comes into play once we know what regional we're at, then we start looking at, okay, what teams are we competing with? And so, once that way, that kind of in between, okay, we know what event we're going to before we actually get there. That's when the pre-scouting takes place of looking at teams at the event. Are they historically a really good team? An average team that can have a good year? Are they a new team? And then looking more into their social media type output of the team, where have they done a robot reveal video before the event that you can look at and kind of get an idea. So it's more so that in between stage and not before we know the events.
And well, we're almost in the end of the section, Teddy, but let me introduce an issue, and I think it's a very reasonable doubt many teams have, specifically the rookie teams. So Luciana Palacios says that from what I've seen, some of the strongest teams deny to share info about their robots and their scouting. Therefore, how can scouting be used in that scenario? And also an anonymous attendee says, do you ever share scouting data with other teams? Do you ever strategize with other teams if they ask you to?
So to answer the first question of what if teams aren't forthcoming with scouting, that's why you scout your stand scouting, right? Because if nothing else, you as a team know what every robot at the competition does performance-wise. Pit scouting, I haven't encountered a scenario in which a team, says no altogether. There's times in which, you're going to pit scout, but they're busy fixing something or the robot's not there. And so we can always come back. But if the case is, the team just says like, no, we don't want to talk to you about the robot, you can always just try and look at your stand data to try and fill in the gaps. And then the second part of the question, can you remind me of what it was again?
Yep. So it's just do you ever share scouting data with other teams? It's also the same, specifically on your team.
So for sharing data, we have shared scouts before to where we scout with other teams. Most notably, iTide 4414, as they're a smaller community team. And so we'll, if we go to the same events, we'll scout together with them and kind of share our data. We've had people who, if you come up and ask to us at an event, can we see like your scouting data? The answer is always yes. Teams have also done that to us. And so we don't go out of our way to like post it online or anything, but we definitely are more than willing to share if there's a newer team. As I found, most teams are. If a team comes up to us and says, "Hey, we're kind of understaffed. Do you mind if you share your scouting data with us?" For us, the answer is always yes, and for most of the teams, at least in California, the answer is usually yes as well.
Got it. So finally, Teddy, well, first of all, it was a pleasure having you. Thank you very much for being here in the warm-up. And most of our audience today here comes from rookie teams from all around the world. So let me ask you, what would be your advice, your best advice for these new teams that are going to participate in their first regional events in a couple months and they want to scout? So what would be your top advice for them as these upcoming weeks are coming with the building season and the regional events?
I think the best advice I can give to rookie teams is KISS, which, if you don't know, is keep it silly, keep it simple, silly. And so what I mean by that is, if this is your first season, your taste of FRC, and you're going into your first event, you can't expect to, be the best robot there, have the most sophisticated scouting app, because most of the time you're not going to be at that place yet. It takes years to develop that type of thing. So it's keeping it simple, so that way you're not trying to overextend yourself. And, if this is your first rodeo and maybe you don't know really how to scout yet, this is your first time and you're trying to learn, keep it simple with like how many points, depending on the game, how many points are scored by every alliance is a good thing to keep track of, and kind of how the robot looks. Usually by the eye test, you can rank the robots pretty decently to where these teams look like they know what they're doing and are really good, down to teams that kind of like are sitting there and it's like, okay, you can clearly see those are maybe not the best robots at an event. So it's kind of keeping it simple and within the scope of your team is a really helpful way to go about scouting and for your first event.
And well, hopefully many of the teams that are watching you right now, many of the rookie teams that are watching you right now will catch your team at Houston in this next championship. So Teddy, again, thank you very much. Thank you for being a warm-up. Your email is right there in the slideshow. So if anyone is willing to get more information or have any other questions you'd like to get to ask Team 5199, please don't hesitate. And thank you, Teddy. It's been an honor to have you.
Thank you so much for having me.